Well, hello, my friends. Thank you all for being with us for another episode of Moral Panic. For those of you who are watching this on the restream, the recording, and for those of you who are watching this live especially, welcome to all of you. Thank you so much. We've got a very interesting show for you all today, but before we get into all that, I hope all of you have been having a good week. Hope all of you have been having a good weekend as well. Hope your Labor Day weekend celebrations have been going swimmingly. And I hope that all of you are finding some joy and some peace in these rather calamitous times that we all live in, and these rather confusing times that we all live in as well, because as we do know, there has been a lot of cause for confusion in the news most recently and in the culture over the past few weeks. But before we get into all that, Nikoji, how are you doing? How are things going?
I'm doing fine. Thank you.
We're back again, aren't we?
We're back again, and happy Labor Day to all. And it's maybe it's a little coincidental, maybe not, but I think we'll be talking on topics of labor, obviously from a more right-wing perspective. But we're going to be talking about the nature of politics as we do on the, pensive politics. This is Moral Panic, but this is a part of the pensive project. And so we're definitely going to be talking all things pensive politics.
Most certainly. So before I do any talking, why don't you lay down some of our topics for today? Because I know we have quite a lot, and I'm going to let you guide which ones we talk about first, because I think that it'll be very important for us to be strategic in how we discuss these things.
That would be wise, so I don't do stream of conscious. Welcome to the chat. Welcome new viewers in the chat. But regardless, we're going to be talking about Chicago drama. That was one of the first topics. And what we mean by that is we're going to be talking things related to National Guard deployment, the Chicago mayor, the Illinois governor. There's a lot of political drama. And then we're going to talk about the residents themselves that they're threatening to. We're going to flip it red. There's a lot of content out there for us. We could react on stream, share our screens, and show you some of the minutes, or rather the footage from the Chicago town halls. And then we're also going to be talking about leftist outrage in a variety of contexts. So in America, we're going to be talking about this notion that we're seeing neo-fascism and that everything Trump is doing is fueling fascism. And so we're going to be reacting. We're going to be reacting to the reactionaries. We like to do that from time to time. And we'll see where that takes us, time permitting. And chat is always welcome to suggest new topics. Time permitting, we might even cross the Atlantic pond, as they say, the small little pond. And we'll talk about the labor politics in the UK. And even though there are different administrations, we could draw at some similarities, because politics is very related to what the people are saying rather than just who's in office.
Most certainly. So there's a few things before we get started on any of these. Actually, I want to drill down. You said we're going to be reacting to the reactionaries.
Yeah.
And that is a very key point, because I actually want to kind of discourse a little bit on reactionism.
Yeah.
I believe in one of my recent videos, I mentioned reactionism. I think it was the flag burning video, where I basically discussed how the pitfalls of being reactionary, the pitfalls of people whose entire posture in public conversation is geared towards a quick flight response rather than a sort of deeper reflection. And I think this goes to the broader point that we currently have a culture of reaction as opposed to a culture of reflection, which is why people can have things like hot takes and sort of viral comments that generate a lot of noise, but don't generate a lot of substance, generate a lot of heat, but little light. Because to react is to simply do something that is rather primal and basic to any human, any animal creature on Earth, right? Cats can react, birds can react, insects can react. But to reflect is to engage in what is uniquely human. So I really think that we're in a really inhuman posture right now in our culture, when we have the rise of reactionaries taking up all the space. And this is regressing us to a more inhuman quality of conversation, where anger, rage, and emotion guide the conversation, and reason is deemed unfashionable and unpopular. So I really think you hit on a point. We're reacting to the reactionaries. We're standing outside of their culture and
Right.
trying to shine some light and say, hey, there's something going on here, and the quality of your thoughts are suffering for it, right? Isn't it funny? Speaking of that fascist thing you mentioned,
Yeah.
I've noticed something. Isn't it funny that most of the people calling Trump a fascist
Right.
are doing so in a reactionary posture?
Exactly. That's
They
the
don't know
point that we're
what
trying to get at. Yep.
right. They don't know what fascism is. They have never read The Doctrine of Fascism by Giovanni Gentili, who was Benito Mussolini's right-hand man, his muse, who literally
Hmm.
wrote down a lot of things that fascists back in the 30s and 40s actually believed, and was arguably the father of philosophical fascism, along with the side of Loyola. They don't know anything about that. They just know they need to apply a label to Donald Trump that's going to make him injure his character in the public mind, and therefore fascism works well for that purpose. Isn't that very interesting?
Yeah, I
It's
think that a
yeah, sorry.
lot of these people like to use the term Trump derangement syndrome. They're stuck in this mindset that Trump is comparable to Hitler. They're still stuck in that. Can you
Absolutely.
believe it? All these years later, and when we talk about leftist conspiracies, that's why they think, oh, Butler was a conspiracy. Like
Yeah.
he wasn't saved by grace or luck. It was a conspiracy, and it's just like, well, you guys would call us Alex Jones people if we said the same thing if that happened to Biden. But so
Well,
to be
yeah,
able
yeah.
to
Well,
look outside, like you said, take a step back and be like, the left has gone mad. They've
yeah.
gone
So actually,
fundamentally
let's
mad.
kind of go a little bit deeper and into that actually, because that's one of the topics we're talking about. So the Butler case, right?
Yeah,
So kind of explain what people are saying, because I've actually seen these comments over the year actually, because it's
yeah,
actually
it's
been
growing, I think.
a year and a few weeks since that tragic incident happened. And actually, before we go to that, let me actually ask you, where were you when President Trump was shot at in Butler? Where were you at? What do you remember doing that day?
When was that incident? Was it during a weekend rally?
It
I
was
don't
like
recall.
July 13th, or 13th,
I
14th.
mean, I
I
may
think
have
it
been
was a week.
working.
Yeah.
I may have been working. Um, I mean, it definitely took the nation by a storm. And I think that what we see in the left is denial, right? A lot of the people, a lot of the conspiratorial thinking starts with denial. I can't fathom this to be true. It bursts my political bubble. It doesn't confirm my bias. So denial that he was fortunate enough to barely get touched by those bullets. It starts with denial. It doesn't confirm their bias, and therefore it must be a conspiracy that somehow this man was not saved, that he was in some sort of orchestrated plot, which is just ridiculous. If it happened to Biden, they would be calling it ridiculous as well. It's just ridiculous, folks.
Yes. So the theory seems to be, and I haven't really heard this recently.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if you have, but I have not really heard this recently. But the theory seems to be that Trump set up the whole Butler episode to curry favor with the electorate, to gain sympathy points, and to win the election, which he ultimately won the election. But he won the election, I think, due to the fact that Kamala Harris was an inferior candidate in the
Right.
moment. The moment at that time was calling towards something a little bit more substantive, something a little bit more revolutionary than what Kamala Harris offered. Plus, the fact that Trump had been shut out of there was several attempts to shut him out from political office through legal warfare and through other kinds of underhanded tricks, including tricks from the intelligence community themselves, which
Hmm.
have recently gotten a lot of new light and has actually brought people like Barack Obama into the crosshairs of a potential legal indictment.
Hmm.
All kind of different things were happening. And the public saw this, and the public was rather, well, parts of the public that were actually aware were rather upset, and they wanted to buck it to the system, so to speak. And they did so by doing that. They did so by lending him a hand like that, and by basically picking it. So there's a lot of reasons he won. I think Butler was just the accelerant to what was almost an inevitable conclusion.
Right.
But the theory seems to be that they staged it to get sympathy points, which I find very odd, very comical, and also very much a lack of self-reflection.
Right.
Because since the election, the political left has had a very hard time reflecting on its own failings. They've been having this process where they're deciding through their institutional arm, the Democratic Party, exactly how to move forward. And a lot of different factions are speaking up, including the faction that is more far left, and they're saying, we tried what they would call a neoliberal candidate. We tried the establishment candidate, and they got cooked. So what needs to happen is someone else needs to arise, someone that's going to be much more powerful, much more sort of with the people, and they need to be the ones who are going to actually be the standard bearer for the Democratic Party. The problem, however, is that the Democratic Party's leadership continues to rebel against its roots. Continues
to interrupt. I don't know if you saw that. We got a super chat.
Graham, thank you. Oh my God, thank you so much, my friend. Thank you so much. Wow, thank you. So early into the stream, thank you so much, my friend. Imagine hating Trump so much that you'll notify the law, let off criminals, and jeopardize your own community. Yes, exactly, totally, 100%. You see, here's the thing that always perplexes me. Okay, in America, we have a very revolutionary ethic when it relates to our politics. We don't hold up people as symbols. We don't hold up people as any kind of divinely inspired leaders. We elect people to positions of power that are subject to public corrective. That means every politician is subject to critique. So, within the American tradition, it is totally fine to voice your opinion about who you want to be in office or not in office. However, a lot of folks on the left have mistaken activism with critique. To merely critique is to point out the flaws you see in something. But to be an activist is to go one step further and try to marry that with action, in this case, action that actually stops the person you're critiquing. And the distinction between merely critiquing and acting on the critique in order to stop someone is the difference between a free society and a society where tyranny rules in the minds of the people. So I really do believe that the institutional left has a tyrannical mind. And in having a tyrannical mind, they have convinced themselves that for the good of the people, they can go ahead and shut off others who harm that objective.
Right.
And there's a deeper story behind this, but I won't get into that right now. But I know Nikoji wanted to say something. But again, thank you for the super chat. I really appreciate it. Your support I'm grateful for it. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Right. On the topic of Kamala, one obvious contention is, where was the primary for her? The so-called Democratic primary, this so-called Democratic Party was so undemocratic. And once they realized that they needed to get rid of Sleepy Joe, who was apparently recovering from a cough, and so much of the power at the Democratic Party came down to donors like George Clooney. And that makes you wonder, is this 2006, like, where the Democratic Party is dictated by Hollywood? Is that really where they're at? That they have no sense of direction, that they need celebrities like the Hollywood Foreign Actors Guild, or what do they call it? The Actors Guild of Hollywood?
So the connection between celebrity culture and American politics is actually, unfortunately, very strong. It's stronger on the left, but it's also strong on the right as well. And this strength, unfortunately, carries a lot of merit in the minds of the public. The fact that you can have somebody, and by the way, I think as time goes on, as celebrity as a concept becomes more accessible to other people,
That is
to
true.
more people, celebrity culture is is losing the power that it once had. For example, back 2008, some people may have been old enough to remember this. I was just a little boy. Back 2008, Oprah, or no, '07, Oprah endorsed Barack Obama over Hillary Clinton in the Democratic Party primaries.
Yep.
This literally tipped the scales for Barack Obama. He was already seen as an up and coming, popular outsider kind of figure. And Hillary Clinton was really having to struggle with being seen as an old guard kind of figure who was
Right.
more establishmentarian. Although many of them on paper had a lot of the same positions. Like, for example, Hillary Clinton wanted to ban gay marriages as a Barack Obama. Hillary Clinton wanted to deport illegal immigrants as a Barack Obama. They actually had a lot of the same positions, but they had different styles and different expressions.
Right.
So when Oprah said, "Obama, you're it," his popularity went up like that.
I'm talking about collusion.
Yeah. Oprah did the same thing to Kamala at the DNC a year ago, and it didn't help because we're getting further from the time where 2008 was only maybe 9-10 years after Oprah's prime, because she was big in the 90s and early 2000s, massive.
Right.
2025 is like a few decades after Oprah's prime. And the thing is, you're going to see a lot of these old world media figures start to lose the sway they have the further they get from their prime. There will be very few exceptions of this, right? If someone like Michael Jackson was still alive, then he would have influence no matter what era he was in. Although I don't think he really ever got into politics that much. But that's just an example. But someone like Oprah, who relied on an audience that at a particular period of time had a particular way of doing media, interact with media, no, she's not going to have as much power. So thankfully, we're going to see celebrity culture start to decline, at least as it relates to the older stars.
Just
What's
to
going to be
steelman your argument. Sorry.
Yes, sir. Go on.
I want to say, just to steelman your argument, it also applies to Republicans before we get contradicted in the chat.
Yes.
We don't want to pretend like it doesn't.
I mentioned it does.
Yeah, to steelman Christian's argument, it's going to lead to the demise of, it's not the topic of the stream, and we're happy to get into it maybe a little later, but it will also lead to the demise of our current president, as he'll be a little less popular, in my opinion, just to steelman the same argument. But as it stands, he is still the president, and that's going to lead us a good segue to today's topic of Chicago and President Trump. I don't know if you had any further comments.
Yes, just to add a little bit more. So on the right, you have these celebrity figures like Ted Nugent and that kind of crowd.
Right.
And I would say that, funnily enough, those figures are more so appraised for their political positions than they are their celebrity. But their celebrity still factors in a lot to how people take them seriously. So I think that point is, celebrity culture as a whole is negative for politics. It's negative for sound political order. It's negative for how we form our political conclusions. It's negative for how we debate issues, because it puts status above substance. It puts flashiness and image above sort of plain spoken clarity. And all politics, all sound politics requires plain spoken clarity. So I think that we have to get beyond that moment in order to have a better kind of politics in this country. That's about it.
I agree.
For now.
Our point wasn't that popular culture is inherently terrible, but our point is that we can pick at it, and
I think much of it is.
Much of it is, and much of it we can pick at it freely. All right, so segue to the current events. Should we share our screens maybe? Because I wanted to maybe show some of the news.
You're free to share yours. Absolutely.
So I wanted to start with Chicago because a lot of this is fresh news, even though it's timestamped yesterday, but it's being uploaded today. So let's properly share my screen, and we will talk about the Chicago mayor. Okay, you can see this. All right.
Yep, there we go.
On Saturday, Mayor Brandon Johnson signed an executive order asking law enforcement to not cooperate with officials in case of a deployment. It also demands federal agents stand down from any attempts.
We will not have our police officers who are working hard every single day to drive down crime deputized to do traffic stops and checkpoints for the president. Protecting Chicago will ensure that every Chicagoan knows their rights, that every single family is prepared, and every part of city government is directed to protect the people of Chicago from federal action.
On Saturday, Trump lashed out at the Illinois governor for opposing the move. Trump already assigned nearly 2,000 troops to Washington, D.C., and is now threatening to extend his crackdown to more Democratic-led cities, including Chicago.
We have received credible reports that we have days, not weeks, before our city sees some type of militarized activity by the federal government. It is unclear at this time what that will look like exactly. We may see militarized immigration enforcement. We may also see National Guard troops. We may even see active duty military and armed vehicles in our streets. We will protect our Constitution, we will protect our city, and we will protect our people. We do not want to see tanks in our streets. We do not want to see families ripped apart. We do not want grandmothers thrown into the back of unmarked vans. We don't want to see homeless Chicagoans harassed or disappeared by federal agents.
All right. So, oh man. All right.
We went from politicians like Alexander Hamilton, Grover Cleveland, Ed Koch, who was one of the great mayors of American history, to like this person. And it's a shame. This is really an example of the tyranny of mediocrity in our politics, because it's everything he said is not so easily disproven and dispatched with. It reflects how he views the audience he's speaking to, the people of Chicago and also people of America. What is happening, contrary to what he's saying, is not akin to a military invasion of a foreign force coming into a sovereign country. What is happening is Chicago is being brought, and by the way, this hasn't even happened yet. It may happen. There's a separate conversation to be had about if the National Guard should be involved in jurisdictions around the country. Many people who watch the channel, watch the content, know that my view is that what you have happening in D.C. and other parts of the country, they are fundamentally a problem of a depraved conscience, of a lack of a culture of the heart, which produces disordered behaviors in people that result in social deterioration and result in bad things happening to other people. And that ultimately any militarized attempt to fix these problems is only a short-term fix. And if they're going to exist at all, it should be a part of a long-term fix, which seeks to build a healthier culture of the heart and seeks to encourage moral education, reflection within the citizenry. That is the only way you fix the problem of crime, criminality, particularly violent criminality, legitimate violent criminality, not criminality made criminality by law, but criminality made criminality by the natural law, established at the foundations, is a result of a messed up conscience. The only reason you're going to go and murder somebody is because you have no sense of justice within your mind, and that means your conscience is depraved, because man requires justice to live in society with other people. The only reason you're going to go and do a violent robbery, a violent carjacking of someone where you pull them out, you hurt them, you take their car, is because you have no sense of respect for the property of others, the possessions of others, and by extension, the livelihoods of other people. That's a depraved conscience. So you have to fix these things at the ground level. Having said that, some people can't be reasoned with. And some people are so seeped in their disordered conscience that they won't listen to any exhortations to education or reflection. So what happens? You have to meet force with force. Force cancels out force. That's a good thing. Force is actually good for that. It's not good for forming anything, but it's good for canceling out other force. So on one level, I think the logic here of the Trump administration is sound. On another level, it does displace the solution for the problem. On to what Johnson said, though. He uses these morally alarmist terms, you say. He says grandmothers being disappeared and homeless people being attacked. The reason he's invoking those categories is not because he's actually worried about those people. If he were, he wouldn't be literally running a social welfare program for migrants that come up from Central America that are actually getting preference over Chicago citizens, that are actually being given shelter space and being given special buildings that were actually promised to be community centers for the people of Chicago. If he actually cared about the grandmothers and all those people, he wouldn't be doing that kind of stuff. But besides the point, he's invoking these categories to ensue a sense of moral terror within the people. And the problem is when you try to moralize identity, which is exactly what he's doing, he's trying to moralize identity. You treat identity and you treat morality more generally as if it exists in a vacuum. And I made this point in my compassionate immigration video. The truth is, it is not uncompassionate to enforce the laws that govern how citizenship and residency in a country ought to be maintained. In fact, it is the height of compassion because it fulfills dignity. How does it fulfill dignity? Because dignity is very simply giving every person exactly what they deserve, treating them in the exact manner they deserve. If someone is here without obeying the laws of this country, if someone is here without respecting the norms of our country, if someone is here while violating the customs of our country and maintaining illegal residency, it is the most dignified thing to get them out because that's exactly what they deserve. The problem is, Brandon Johnson is using morality as rhetoric and not morality as a principle, because morality as rhetoric raises the heart to a level where it suspends your reason. But if you use morality as a matter of principles, as a science of action, the reason and your emotions coexist and they produce rightful conduct. So not only is Mr. Johnson confusing a lot of things, not only is he moralizing identity in order to provoke an emotional reaction within the hearts of his citizens to get them to support him, not only is he disrespecting justice by refusing to understand that enforcing the law is inherently a dignified act, he is also, in doing all of these things, showing just how little he cares for the people in the city he was elected to serve. And I would just to close my little rant, that if this is the kind of person that one of America's most beautiful cities, because Chicago is most certainly a beautiful city. I've been there a few times. Beautiful, one of the best skylines in the whole country. Just seriously, I think it even competes with like let me not say that. I won't say that.
Competes with parts of Florida.
No. Yeah, we can say that. Let's say that. Okay. That's one of the best skylines in the country. If a place like that, one of the marvels of American ingenuity, can produce someone like him, then I think it's a bad omen for the state of our country.
I have another video to continue based off this, and this is from the town hall. I believe it's the town hall where the mayor is questioned by Republicans.
Yeah. In
fact, one of them is even wearing a shirt from the assassination attempt. So let's go just play that video from the Daily Caller. Give me 2 seconds.
Gonna be an order. Next, it's gonna be an investigation. Then it's gonna be an indictment. Conviction. That's what's gonna happen to you.
Mr. Brandon Johnson, I'm up here. I am speaking right now, so I would love your undivided attention, please. I'll wait. So this just proves to you the lack of leadership that you show in this city. You can't even give me straight eye contact. Now, I'm going to let you know now, the people of Chicago, we're done with you. It is insane how we have been voting Democrat for over 60 plus years, and we've never seen a change from people like you, Lori Lightfoot, Rob Emanuel. It is insane. Chicago was 37% red. In 2020, it was only 15%. So we're waking up. So you can pretend that this isn't happening, but I know for a fact that you will not have that seat the next election.
You so strong about protecting those aliens, but you won't do nothing for the U.S. citizens.
I got a great way how we can what we can do with this budget. First, let's start with cutting off illegals, getting free everything. Free housing, free schooling, free food. Yeah, let's start with that. That'll save us a lot of money. What, 600 million? Let's start there. Then let's start with your salary. You are going down in history as the worst mayor in America. Let's start with cutting yours. You making too much money. Let's start there. You Democrats, and you remember you told us to defund the police? Remember, you ran on that. Remember, you was the defund the police? Let's start with that. Let's defund the police detail that you have. And let's put the police back in our neighborhood, because we're not for defunding the police. Won't you just practice what you preach? Remove all the details. We saw you coming in today. You had all the police presence. So let's take some of that away.
Man, I think you might have some thoughts on that. Jeez. They did not want to keep it bluntly.
No.
Or they did, rather.
No, I think it's both comical because, see, when the truth is told in a way that shocks sensibilities,
yeah,
it produces a humorous effect within you, and that humorous effect actually softens you to it. The number one reason why people don't get told the truth very often is because most people don't have the ability to grapple with it very well. The whole idea of you can't handle the truth, in some cases, is true. Some people really cannot handle the truth, particularly when it's about them. But humor can kind of even desensitize the most hardest heart towards that difficulty, that tension of grappling, and make it a little bit easier. When it comes to a politician, however, who knows better and who is calculating and who is manipulative and whose conscience works in a very different way, it's not all the way turned on to 100%. And the truth not only, I think, creates attention for them, if it does at all, the truth also poses a risk to their power. And if they're doing the wrong things, of course. If not, if they're doing the right things, if they're an upstanding politician and everything, then great. The truth is actually a benefit to them. But when the truth is no longer a benefit to them, then that's actually a big problem now, isn't it? And the truth, not to overuse the word, is that Brandon Johnson himself has proposed many disastrous policies for Chicago that are causing a subset of sort of African-American Republicans to rise up and say, this is enough. This is enough. I mean, I actually have a story. I spoke in Chicago once. So that there was a Blexit chapter there. I'm not sure you remember Blexit. Blexit was Miss Owens' old group before she went crazy and became a drama monger. Well, she's always been a drama monger, but you know what I mean. But the group at the time had no connection with her explicitly. She had moved on to other things, and she was at Daily Wire at the time. So I actually spoke to a Blexit chapter in Chicago at the top of a rooftop bar. I spoke about our Constitution. I spoke about a lot of different things. And after my speech, I was sitting down talking to some of the Blexit members. A group of young, like, black kids, like, walked up to the rooftop bar. I think they were like partying. They went to the party or something. And like, they were like, the girls were dressed in a way that I think would make any sensible father ask himself, what's going on here? The guys were dressed as if they were, playboys. Like, it was a very interesting experience. And the reason I'm talking about the culture like this is because it's a foreign culture to me. I've never dressed like a playboy. You guys see my style. I don't. I dress like I'm the guy from Walmart because I get my clothes from Walmart. So that's how I dress. So it was all very odd to me. And as they were talking, I could see what they were talking about, and the girls were dancing provocatively. And I asked one of the guys, I'm like, hey, what's all this right here? He said, well, this is the culture. The culture of what? The culture of Chicago. And as I'm seeing this stuff right next to me, like a few feet next to me, I'm looking out to the skyline of Chicago, and I'm seeing these massive spiral-like skyscrapers breaching the clouds. Just absolutely beautiful. beautiful examples of American ingenuity. And I'm asking myself, is the culture I'm seeing a few feet away from me, does that produce the kind of excellence, innovative, creative genius that it takes to create what I'm looking at in the distance? Absolutely not. It does not. So there are some folks within the African American community in Chicago, and I use that term very loosely and very broadly because obviously African Americans, like everyone else, are very diverse people, and they are not a monolith, but I'm using it as a shorthand. Within that community more broadly, they are seeing a lot of this, and they are also seeing the political consequences of a culture that praises debauchery and praises degeneration over praising innovation, creativity, and virtue. And they are speaking out at the symbol of that politics, which happens to be Brennan Johnson, who preys on that and uses it as a vector for political power, as opposed to doing what any sensible community leader should do and exhort the people towards a better posture of life, and then create a politics that actually respects their ability to pursue that on their own terms by acting not as a manager, not as a guide, but simply as a guardian, right? As a guardian for them against those who would seek to violate the principles of justice and violate fidelity. So in the interest of fidelity, I would actually say that maybe it would be important for Mr. Mayor Brandon Johnson to be legally required, and any other mayor after him to be legally required to respond to the questions and critiques he gets when he's doing these Q&As. Because how am I to know the mayor's sentiments if he gets to choose them in a public forum to his own liking? I can only know the little he decides to show me. But if I were to say, no, Mr. Mayor, while your citizens are speaking to you, you must respond to them in a way that is not dismissive, in a way that actually answers their questions. You can choose how to answer their questions, but you must answer the question substantively. If you make that a law, I think that would go a long way in ensuring transparency and a broader sense of fidelity to those in Chicago. But I think more generally, you're having a sort of tension here within Chicago where a lot of the residents are saying no more. We're seeing my presidential America get bussed into the city, which, by the way, Greg Abbott's a little bit at fault with that, but we'll put that aside. But Chicago is the one that's actually keeping them there, getting bussed to the city, and then them taking up the homeless shelters at the behest of the city, and then the taxes of the residents being raised to support this foreign class. How can I trust my political order, my political authority, my statesman, my mayor, is doing best by us, is pursuing the interests of justice, if he is preferring a foreign people over his own people? Fidelity is not just a thing that's nice, it's a moral principle. And without fidelity, truth and justice don't exist. Because fidelity is a kind of loyalty that breeds faith in what you can do as a leader, as a person. Without that faith, how can you be trusted to be a just person? Without that faith, how can any word that arises from your mouth be taken to be truthful or taken to be not a lie? And one of our members of the community actually really has done a good job in highlighting this. But the fidelity crisis is, I think, part of the entire milieu happening around the country, and it's coming up, it's bubbling up right here in Chicago, and you saw a lot of it reflected in that clip as well. So I think there's a lot of things going on here. I think that it's beautiful to see. I just hope that enough Chicagoans wake up and say, no, this is our city, and we're going to demand more from our leaders. Chicago is a city of great pizza, of Chicago style.
Oh, that's a controversial take.
Of the Chicago School of Economics, one of the most brilliant economic business traditions in the recent world. Skyscraper. There's so much about Chicago to love, and yet it's being mismanaged to hell.
So I'm going to share a recent article of some of the more City Hall drama and local politics. And we won't spend too much time on this, but I will share the article to kind of cap.
Spend as much time as you want.
Yeah.
You got a lot of time here.
So, civil rights attorney with history of suing the Chicago Police Department to serve as Johnson's strategy chief. This is recent news. With a history of suing over misconduct is now his director of strategy. Move that Pope Police City Council called a serious conflict of interest. And she comes from Northwestern School of Law, Community Justice and Civil Rights Clinic. Jeez. What are your thoughts on that? What's going on? Why is academia, this is what they call the intelligentsia, right? Is the intelligentsia infecting the Chicago council, the Chicago mayor?
Yeah, look, as a mayor, your number one goal is to ensure that your administration can deliver the goods that you promised during your mayoral run, and also to ensure the city is running not just efficiently, but also justly and correctly. And when you put on a lady who has a history, apparently, of destroying trust in one of the city's core institutions, the police, you undermine the express goal of the mayoral office quite clearly. And by the way, look, it's fine to criticize anyone. It's fine to criticize the cops. If you want to, it's fine. But what is not fine is to be an agitator for so many years and then expect you can reasonably serve within the system you've been trying to tear down. Why should I trust that you will not tear the system down from within? If you're going to oppose the system, oppose it from without. Oppose it from outside. Why oppose it from within? It just undermines the trust given to you by the people. Salus populi suprema lex, right? The welfare of the people shall be the ultimate goal of governance, Latin phrase. So I think that's just a very odd, but it's actually not really odd if you know who Johnson is. Johnson,
I actually have something else to share on that. Yeah,
he ran as a revolutionary. What he is doing is most certainly within that tradition, right? It'd be as if Mamdani hired Benjamin Crump, if you know who that is. Ben Crump is like chief legal guy. It would be right with what Mamdani wants.
And to prove it, I can I'll show you exactly what you were talking about. So one of Johnson's aide, this is from a year ago, has been demanded an ouster after it was surfaced that she called for the abolition, potentially, of police. And look at the origins of these, unions and labor movements, right? Demanding Johnson fire a top aide for calling police effing pigs, and demanding or openly talking about defunding and abolishing. So clearly the residents that were at that town hall, that budget meeting, they were not lying with some of their sources.
No, they've been quite truthful. I think they're being quite truthful. Fact is, Johnson has stacked his administration with activists who have no interest in that guiding principle of all political order, salus populi suprema lex. Salus populi suprema lex. The welfare of the people shall be the ultimate consideration. They are instead interested in an inverse phrase, where it's instead the welfare and pursuit of a political agenda, even if it's at the expense of what is correct for the people, shall be the ultimate consideration. And that's what Johnson's mayoralship has basically been, an attempt to impose an agenda upon the people of Chicago. What we're seeing, that is being pushed back against in a rather fierceful, rather, I would say, beautiful and wondrous way to see. So, who you staff your administration with says a lot about what you value as a leader.
What are your thoughts on a lot of these protests and a lot of these far left groups having connections with unions? Even if we look beyond America, it's like United Workers, United Workers. Well, are you guys United Workers, or are you a little more than United Workers with different intents?
Yeah. You're asking the right
Good
questions. What do I think about these protests that seem to involve unions? Okay. So, back in the 1890s, there was actually a strike in Chicago called the Pullman Strike. The Pullman Strike, I actually mentioned this in, I think, the video I did about Amanda Seals. The Pullman Strike was a strike done by a bunch of companies, but no, by a bunch of workers that
Right.
work for the company, the Pullman Company, who all were given food, board, housing, and they lived in a town also ran by the Pullman Company. So the company was also not just the hand that gave them money, but the hand that fed them and clothed them and all kind of stuff as well. So really, it was rather a holistic arrangement. You wouldn't really see these days workers living in a town run by Walmart or run by Amazon, but that's what happened back in that day. So the workers were not happy about their wages. They weren't happy about the hours they worked. They were upset about a lot of different things. And here in comes, taking advantage of their anger, a leftist organizer, a socialist actually by the name of Eugene V. Debs, who many people may know as a very prominent labor activist, one of the precursors to the AFL-CIO, which became one of the, it's like to this day, one of the biggest union organizations in the whole world. Eugene V. Debs came along and said, hey, let's riot. And he caused an insurrection in Chicago. It was so bad, several Pullman Company members died, several workers died. It was so bad that Grover Cleveland was one of our favorite presidents, had to call in the National Guard to suppress what was happening. That event was the result of organized union-type, activist-type action. I think that unions have two purposes. Unions ideally should exist for the workers to be able to advocate for themselves within the workplace. Now, the moment this becomes an imposition rather than a conversation is the moment the union moves from being a simple suggestion, a simple advisory group of workers to a tyrannical takeover of something that is not theirs. Unions don't own the companies or the institutions they seek to be in. But the problem is, many unions have acted as imposers, as conquistadors, so to speak, and they have sought to overtake the institutions they happen to be in. This is why the teachers' unions, Randy Weingarten, all of these people have been one of the biggest purveyors of poisonous anti-American age-inappropriate propaganda that has coursed its way through the blood of public schools in America. This is why one of the reasons why it's very difficult to fire a bad teacher, except in very extreme and predatory cases, is because of the protections afforded by the teachers' unions. The union goes from being a suggestion, a sort of advisory committee of workers, peacefully asking for something from their boss, to instead being a conquest of the institution to overtake the institution in the worst way, backed by force of law. So I think that in a similar way that many unions seek to impose rather than suggest, activist movements, especially those fueled by a left-wing bent that view power as a very core focus in shaping the course of society, also seek to impose rather than to suggest, because in their view, imposition is needed because there's a bunch of morally undesirable things happening in the culture that require corrective by use of law. Unions operate by the same ethic, if those unions, as most unions are today, seek to impose. So that's one thing. Unions should be able to exist to suggest, but oftentimes they exist to impose. And then two, unions exist oftentimes to ward away workplace injustices, but at the same time, they oftentimes become purveyors of that same kind of workplace injustice by, again, shielding bad behavior of their members and by imposing upon the institution. So I'm not surprised that unions are actually behind a lot of this stuff. I'm not surprised that unions are actually behind a lot of the protests we see on the left, because they both have the same ethic, and unions simply know how to organize better than a lot of other people do. So I think it's a feature, not a bug of unions. I think that, in all honesty, I advocate a rather rigorous program of union busting in this country. I think that right to work should be passed in all 50 states. I think that I really have a really radical view towards it. I don't get asked about unions often, but this is my very radical view towards them, because I understand in reality exactly what they do, how they operate, and the deleterious effect they have on our institutions, both social, political, and economic here in this country.
Yeah, I was having some slight audio issues, but I do agree. I had to fix one of my headsets, but I'll do that a little later.
Yeah.
And we got a question from Bud.
Yeah.
Is it ethical to join? I mean, I have a semi laissez-faire approach to unions because I do understand how collective bargaining can work.
Here's what.
So if Bud has an option to join a union, or I get nothing for it, what are your thoughts?
Okay, here's my approach to this. What is the nature of the union? You have to answer that before you can answer this question. Again, if the union exists as a simple advisory committee to advocate for the interest of those who work in that company, but it does not exist to impose upon the institution or the company, then there aren't many ethical problems, although there could be a problem of entangling interests. And that problem of entangling interests could potentially pose trouble for you down the line. But that's more of a strategic question than an ethical question. However, if that union does seek to impose, then I do think it would be unethical to contribute to their power by adding another person to their ranks. So it all depends on the nature of the union. And also, why would you want to join? Why do you want to join? That's a very good question, too. Do you want to have someone to help you if you want to bargain for a raise? Do you want to have the feeling of camaraderie and membership amongst people within your job? Like, exactly what is the reason for you wanting to join the union? And how is that going to impact your professional trajectory? That's the other question I would ask as well. So it all depends on a lot of different things, a lot of different question marks, so to speak.
There's actually a new news when it comes to in Silicon Valley, the unionization with Uber, and I could pull that up shortly because I think it's relevant to what we're talking about.
No, I certainly would agree. I think attempts to unionize in gig jobs are also particularly troublesome as well. They're especially troublesome. There's been a concerted attempt to make Uber more like taxi cabs in many ways, to regulate them like taxi cabs.
So, on this topic, there is some news, and it's California lawmakers strike a deal that allows Uber drivers to unionize.
Yeah, I think when you come to the gig economy, the question of unions should be absolutely off the table. Because the gig economy is entirely resultant of your effort. You're not getting a salary, you're basically getting a commission, essentially. And the best way to get more money, the best way to get a better amount of financial resources in that job is to work harder, is to produce more, is to put in more hours.
So,
whereas the case for unionization becomes a little bit more convincing, although I'm not really convinced, when you have like a salary job or just an hourly job, right? Where you have a set amount of hours a week. The gig economy is not like that. And a lot of people, mark my words, unions are going to be the vector for gig workers to demand more than their position actually merits. And by doing so, it's going to cause companies to economize. How are they going to economize? They're going to economize by either automating delivery services or pickup services, which, by the way, it's not entirely out of the question. There already are drones that deliver your packages for you. It's not out of the question. Or they're going to economize by simply, cutting back on the amount of drivers that can actually use their services. They may even have an application now for Uber or something like that, which artificially limits the pool of drivers. Whereas now anyone can do Uber. So I really don't. Unionization for gig jobs is just a horrible idea of massive proportions. I don't.
Yeah, maybe I think I have a soft spot for some collective bargaining. And if I'm not mistaken, I do believe that there are some conservatives who are also, like libertarian conservatives, who also respect the notion of it.
Good for them.
as a potential solution.
I can't speak for anyone else. All I know is that I think any effort to unionize the gig economy is an absolute disaster. A
So
disaster.
are you against the developments in California?
Yes. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, look, the idea of collective bargaining, as I mentioned, if it's a voluntary, suggestive suggestion, I have nothing against that. If you simply want to get together with a bunch of people and say, "Hey, let's barter for higher wages," I don't see a problem with that. But the problem is, unions oftentimes don't end there. Unions oftentimes evolve into being an imposition upon the institution. And the moment you go from asking for a higher wage to using the force of your union and the force of law to impose upon your company or institution to give you something, is the moment you become unethical, in my view. And that's what a lot of unions have become these days, across industries, in the schools, across industries. So that's my view.
Yeah. All right. I could have been mistaken in some of my political references. I might have to double check whatever I was referencing.
Yeah.
But on this topic of unions, I did want to. I will be going across the pond to UK if the advertisements can get it. Sky News has too many advertisements blocking the screen. But I will share my screen, and we could talk about some of the developments in UK and how it also involves unions to some degree. So as we sometimes like to do, we like to look across the pond and see what the politics are like in Western Europe. So this is new developments out of UK. A police officer was punched in the face after a protester with children marched through a shopping center. And a lot's been said on both sides. In UK, it seems, as for maybe the police are being too extreme. Like similar topics that we've discussed in America, we're seeing the same topics cross the pond and have the same issues. So perhaps this was more of a clash with nationalists rather than a clash with, let's see if we could even zoom in on this. It's kind of hard to tell, but clearly this one is more clear that they're counter protesters. So they have their own protest culture war going on. And I think we saw that during COVID and Black Lives Matter era, that whatever happened to US in this digital world was completely globalized. And here we have a counter protester saying, deport racists back to hell. Anti-colonial, isn't this ironic? Anti-colonial solidarity next to the British flag. And some references to Palestine and fascism. That's what we were talking about earlier. And so what we've seen in America is certainly being seen across the pond, right? Like these topics, we're not unknown to these topics. We're very well versed in these topics as Americans.
Right. That's true. It's true. Yeah. So there's a question that we all have to ask ourselves when it comes to these protests. And that question is, are these protests organic or are they manufactured? Is the sentiment behind them organic or is it manufactured? Now, those are two interrelated but distinct questions. Because a protest can be manufactured, but there can be sentiment behind it that actually is very much real. The problem is most people who have a strong sentiment won't go out and protest. But those who do become the voice for that camp, even if they aren't really the voice for that camp. And there does seem, we did some research on this earlier, there does seem to be a rather sophisticated network of non-governmental organizations in the UK who are seeding the public discourse with these kind of protests to make it seem as if public opinion is against immigration restrictionism and also against sort of cultural defense that many of our friends over in the UK are mounting by virtue of their insistence that the Islamization of the UK is a fundamental negative for the development of the British civilization, and also that the boats constantly coming in of migrants by the boatload are also rather negative and putting a strain on British society. Both of those sentiments are what a lot of the sort of right wing, the grassroots right wing, I might say, in Britain, are trying to exercise. Unfortunately, the institutional right wing, people like Nigel Farage and others, seem to be softening on that particular sentiment in the UK. And that is coloring how that whole issue is being seen in that part of the political spectrum over there. So if you're able to hijack the conversation and make it seem as if public opinion is against what a lot of folks in your culture are thinking, is against the basic desire for cultural self-preservation, then you're essentially able to destabilize any political program that would seek to ensure cultural self-preservation before it even manifests. So what we're seeing here is we're seeing a hijacking of the mass veto. The mass veto is what happens when public opinion corrects and limits what those in power do, right? It is a kind of, I would say, even forcible assertion of the consent of the citizenry, right? The consent of the government is simply the legitimacy for political order to operate. The mass veto is a imposition upon the legitimacy. It's like, okay, I gave you a credit card, right? So let's say the consent of the government is the credit card. The mass veto is the credit card limit. Okay, we gave you the credit card, but you cannot go beyond your $500 limit. If you do that, we're going to hit you with interest fees, and we're going to stop you from even using the rest of the card. It'll be maxed out. That's the mass veto, putting it in those kind of terms. Well, what NGOs try to do, NGOs with a very particular political bent on both sides, especially on the left, they try to hijack the mass veto to put an imposition upon a just use of political order by making it seem unpopular and unwell with the people. And it's artificial entirely. It's totally artificial. And in being totally artificial, it actually does not resonate with what the people in that country happen to want. It is the inversion of the principle salus populi prima lex. That's what's happening here. And I feel for my friends over in the UK. I feel for a lot of my friends over in many other European countries that have been literally handed over to cultural and national suicide, given with this kind of artificial compassion manufactured to justify it. I feel immensely for them. And I think the only answer is to develop an anti-propaganda strategy in pursuit of veracity that will put in the minds of the citizenry a seed of enlightenment that will allow them to discern with ease the distinction between an artificial protest and an organic protest, and how the artificial protest is being leveraged by higher powers to push a narrative that is not true. Although you may not even need that enlightenment quite yet, because what is happening increasingly across Europe, we are seeing this kind of sentiment, even if it's being shut off politically, like Le Pen was in France. She was shut off politically by the French government. Even if that is not quite succeeding, you are seeing the rise of a sort of cultural awakening. And that alone, no matter how much this artificial mass veto is pushed, is going to be, you're not going to be able to ignore it for too long. It's going to become undeniable and inevitable. So by that point, you have to ask yourself the question, do we have a country worth saving, or do we have a country that is already gone? And a lot of people, unfortunately, will have to be asking that question very soon. So, yeah.
What do you think about this notion that we talk about very often, and I think it's very true, that there are these cultural cycles, these socio-political cycles, and that maybe in the left they swung left, and then shortly it will be swinging back right. I don't know who that means, but they've had a lot of mediocre milk toast, I guess you could say, center right people, and now they got a Labor government.
Yeah.
And this notion that they're going to go back to being center right, this conservative, maybe in one generation there'll be a liberal Democrat because they have a three-party system, three major party. What are your thoughts on that notion that underlying this all, there are these figures, there are these people that climb just like climbing the corporate ladder, they climb the political ladder, but that the underpinning of it is that shift, that pendulum that we were talking about with State of Daniel, that is going to be going back and forth, and it's something inherent to our human nature.
Well, what I think is that I think it is true. Cultural sentiment can produce a certain kind of politician. Trump is evidence of that. But it's also true that all politicians, no matter where they come from, they are bound by the norms of power. And the norms of power have a way of corrupting men of good character. The norms of power have a way of corrupting men of good conscience and forcing them or encouraging them towards conclusions that are milquetoast and that preserve the system while compromising their character. And a lot of folks believe this is what happened to Nigel Farage. I'm not myself going to cast any aspersions upon Nigel, but I do know how he was talking a few years ago is not how he's talking now. And
can you actually catch me up to speed? Yeah, so I haven't been.
Yeah, no, Nigel used to be really hard
I used to
on the
follow
immigration
Nigel
issue.
on and off.
He used to be really hard on. He used to be really hard on the immigration issue. Part of Brexit wasn't just to be divorced from the EU; it was also to be divorced from the sort of open borders ideology that thought that the EU essentially foisted upon all of its member nations by virtue of the Schengen zone, which has been sort of borderless European nations able to travel through with them with ease. Well, now the sort of, now that Britain has independence from the EU virtually, the emphasis is really no longer on as much as on the immigration hardline as it should be, because they don't want to be seen as racist, right? The Reform Party don't want to be seen as racist. That's essentially what it comes down to.
I for some reason I haven't caught up with those developments. I thought that the reform movement, Reform UK, I thought they were doing. I didn't know that there was a softening.
There has been a massive one.
Is it a political softening that deep down their principle that they still believe in the principles they believed in before?
Well, if you compromise your principles to pursue politics, then there's a problem already. But a lot of the reform base is actually displeased with the direction of the reform leadership. So it's not the base that's softening.
I didn't know that. That's interesting.
Yeah, it's not. It's actually the leadership that's softening. It's Nigel Farage that's softening. There's a lot of problems with that. There. By the way, I have had a vague interest in this kind of stuff for a while. I interviewed Nicholas Lysak, who is a reform influencer on social media, and I've been interested.
I'd be happy to talk with him on stream.
Anyway. I'm not too sure he'll be interested in that. I think anyway. But in the past, I talked to him. If he wants to come back on, he can. I don't think he'll be interested, but I think if he wants to, he can.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no softening, a massive softening.
Yeah. I see. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Yeah. To bring it back to the U.S., and viewers in the chat, feel free to ask any questions. But to bring it back to the U.S., I will share my screen back to a Chicago union-related topic. So here we have a podcast from 2021. Remember this time period where the American Overton window was incredibly scrupulous, where everyone had scrupulosity except for the 5% of the population? And can you believe this title? Yeet Cops. This Is Your Afterlife is apparently a podcast with Dave Mayer. Yeet Cops. Kennedy Barley is a legislative director for United Working Families. So she's interested in working families, but she wants to yeet cops. And she went from thinking about her movement in terms of I'll die for this and I'll live for this.
You just said she's interested in working
but she wants to yeet cops. What has happened to the American left?
Oh boy. Oh man.
Isn't this
she's interested
interesting?
in working family. Oh boy. Oh man. What do I
Because a lot of working families, the father may be a cop, the mother may be a cop. Those are working families. How did we get to a point where working families do not include families of law enforcement? So,
well, the thinking is that if you're in law enforcement or you're adjacent to law enforcement or you sympathize with law enforcement, you are in effect a functionary of the system, and the system is oppressive, and therefore if you are in any of those categories I just mentioned, you are therefore enabling oppression, and therefore you're opposed to working families. That's the logic. It's incorrect logic, but that's the logic. So many ideologies on the left are totalizing in that they consume every consideration about every aspect of life. And so far as there's no nuance or distinctions between them, it's all reduced to one singular plane, rich versus poor, the bourgeoisie versus the proletariat, big business versus small business, Main Street versus Wall Street, all the same result of the same flattening of meaning and distinction into one singular plane. So this is what happens. This is what you get. You get stuff like this. We're going to yeet cops by supporting working families. It's the same kind of thing, unfortunately.
So,
it's the same kind of tortured idea.
To what extent is Trump's usage of the National Guard simply a response to failed police usage in some of these cities like Chicago, that they've enacted a lot of support for this notion that we must defund? And hello to Blue Streamer in the chat.
Hello.
But so to what extent could you reply to the average American Democrat and say, listen, you're overreacting with this concern of fascism, and in reality, he's using these National Guards strategically to actually help the citizens of these Democrat mayors.
Here's what I think.
Cities.
Here's what I think. As I mentioned, I do think that military force, National Guard force, is only a temporary solution to what should be a cultural project, which is creating a healthier culture of the heart. So that's what I would say. Having said that, any attempt to say that using the National Guard, which is quite literally a homeland militia, and by the way, militias are a strong part of the American tradition. It's actually literally into our Constitution, in the first 10 amendments of our Constitution, the Bill of Rights, a well-regulated militia, be necessary to a citizenry of a free people, security of a free people, the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. I basically just recited the Second Amendment word for word with a few imperfections here and there. But that's essentially a part of the language and history of our country. So the National Guard, a homegrown militia, a homegrown, more officialized militia, defending a city against a criminal element is not at all a fascism. That is perfectly in step with the American tradition. Fascism, let's actually walk through this, because I hear this word so often, and I've actually done videos about fascism and Nazism, exploring the philosophical origins of both, and I'm not going to go into a big thing, but I'll just be very brief. In order to be a fascist, it requires a lot more than just military power or military presence. Yes, it's true that fascist regimes have used military presence to project strength. But that does not mean every government that uses military presence to correct a problem is fascist. That's an odd association value. It's a non sequitur of the highest order, or might I say the lowest order, because it brings down our thinking to the level of reaction and takes away from the level of reflection. Because for many people, they hear the word fascists, and in their mind, a strong sense of disgust is produced, so much that it shuts down any ability for them to reflect upon the issue deeper and therefore bring them towards the light of truth. It keeps them in the darkness and away from the light. That's the first thing. Military presence is not by itself a signifier of fascism. If this fact is established, then that means the critique being leveled against the president on the basis of him using a militia that literally defends the homeland, not even the military, a militia, a homegrown militia, which is the National Guard, is completely dispelled. But secondly, even if we were to accept that military presence was a surefire indicator of fascism, even if we were to accept that, we would have to also ask ourselves the question, what's the ideology backing this? Because fascism is, in essence, a worldview. I say that it is a worldview where metaphysics meets politics. Some people may say, well, what does that all mean? It basically means a view you have about the nature of the world meets how you think politics should exist. Fascism is simply a view that is actually even a pseudo-religious view. It is, in its proper understanding, fascism is a view that there is this overriding principle that exists somewhere out there that imposes upon us a kind of strict hierarchy that society has to be organized in. And the way that you organize society with a strict hierarchy is through the levers of power. So it's inherently an authoritarian ideology based on a mystical idea. That's essentially all it is. And this mystical idea bleeds down to every single level of human life. It bleeds down to the essence of man as a creature, bleeds down to the purpose of society, bleeds down to the telos of man, what his initial purpose is, bleeds down to how political order should be organized, bleeds down to how military should be organized. All these things, fascism literally bleeds down from the abstract heavens into the actual world in their view. And so there is a lad, as I mentioned, named Giovanni Gentile, who was the muse of Mussolini. And Giovanni Gentile wrote a book called The Doctrines of Fascism, which also was allegedly co-authored by Mussolini, although that's the historicity of that is debated. And in the Doctrine of Fascism, Giovanni Gentile was actually quite clear that fascism opposes things like, he called it 17th century economic liberalism, basically capitalism, basically Adam Smith, basically the lifeblood and heritage of the American economic system from the 18th century onward. It opposes what he called it individualism, which is simply recognizing that people have rights and they exist independent of any kind of organized structure. He calls out all these different things as being signs of a depraved culture. So any American president, especially one that says we're going to make America great again, that operates you guys may hear my cat's off in the distance. He's meowing, so just ignore him. He'll be fine. Any American president that is, especially one that is referencing the original ideas of America, is going to be anathema to any idea of fascism. Because whereas fascism casts the destiny of man in the abstract heavens, Americanism casts the destiny of man in his own actions from a healthy ordering of his nature infused with virtue and towards rest of society. Whereas the fascist view is not grounded. The American view of man, of society and politics, is grounded in what we can do as rightfully oriented beings, what we can do as virtuous individuals, and what we can do in a system where the political order is limited by first principles in a constitution which enforces those first principles. So in all reality, it's literally impossible for a president that literally says, make America great again, to be a fascist, because he'd be contradicting himself. And that's not what's happening whatsoever. Also, I mentioned hierarchy. So there's Gentile, but then there's Evola. Julius Evola is one of the most, I think, wicked thinkers in the history of philosophy. He's also a fascist. He subscribed to this idea of like spiritual racism. He believed that the races were spiritually different. Not just physically, spiritually. Their souls were different. He was a very odd and wrongly enchanted kind of person.
What time period was this? Sorry?
What's that?
What time period?
Oh, this is like 20th century. 20th century.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Like fascism is rather new ideology. He was like one of the like fathers of Italian fascism. So he was in the same period as Gentile and Mussolini. So Evola had this idea that every man's soul is different, and some souls are inferior to others. A very much of a Nietzschean idea, I might even say. Some souls are inferior to others.
Hmm.
And the moment a soul moves beyond its place in the hierarchy, structure collapses, society collapses, degeneracy collapses. And it's for this reason that Ebola said that equality is a bad idea, because equality does not recognize the inferiorities and superiorities of certain souls. So, to be a fascist, you have to believe in several things. You have to believe equality is a lie. You have to revolt against reason. In fact, they actually literally say that fascism is a revolt against reason. You have to reject the individual. You have to reject the notion of rights. You have to reject the notion of a limited political order. You have to reject the notion of a sort of grounded view of men. You have to reject so many of the things that American presidents, especially Donald Trump, who says make America great again, rely on implicitly to bring forth credibility to their political projects. That is why Trump could never be a fascist, because real fascism literally requires a rejection of Americanism. And you cannot reject Americanism and affirm Americanism at the same time. It is impossible. So, no, he's not a fascist, not even close. We have had American statesmen, American politicians that have come close to authoritarianism, but it's authoritarianism colored with a uniquely American character. You see, fascism cannot easily exist here in a broad way because fascism rejects the American character. There are fascists in America, but their products don't have enough political steam because they reject the character of the nation they're in. Whereas in European countries that don't really have the same axiomatic, the same first principles ground that American does, are more susceptible to those kind of movements, right? There's a reason why in the 1930s, the American Nazi Party could have this massive rally in New York City and yet not taint the hearts of most Americans. Because even back then in the 30s, where American conscience was still developing towards the issue of race and religion and immigration, all that kind of stuff, there's a lot of things going on in the cultural moment. Even then, Americans were like, no, we're not going to embrace Nazism. In fact, we're going to condemn Hitler. And not only that, we're not just going to condemn Hitler, we're going to oppose his advances in Europe. That's what the American public was back in the 30s and 40s. So much so that they literally sacrificed their lives to give it to the war machine, which there's controversy over. I'm not saying right or wrong. I'm just saying this is what happened as a historical fact. So it is literally almost impossible for fascism to take root in America as fascism. But it's possible for authoritarianism, which is not all forms of authoritarianism are fascism, to take root in America. The closest we've gotten is people like Huey Long, right?
Yeah.
The former governor of Louisiana, who was like a mob boss. He was an authoritarian, left-wing nut job. Like he literally started this idea of these sort of share your wealth clubs, which were these like socialist clubs that popped up around the country, basically trying to exhort wealthy people to like share their wealth with people, kind of redistribution idea. Huey Long controlled Louisiana with an iron fist. In fact, he was so powerful in the state that when he graduated to be senator of Louisiana, he quite literally controlled the governor of Louisiana who succeeded him and had still control over the state capital, even in Washington. And Huey was so powerful and so influential that it was thought that if he had actually lived to challenge FDR for the Democratic nomination, he would have won over FDR. This guy had a following of millions around the country. So if Huey Long hadn't been assassinated and he actually had the chance to run for president, which he was going to do, he could have been the president instead of FDR easily. He was an authoritarian. He was a dictator.
Why was he assassinated?
Yeah, he was killed. Like he was walking in the state capital, Louisiana, and someone just shot him in the back. He was killed. And like that, one of the biggest mob bosses in the political history died. It was like the 1930s, I think. So he was a dictator. FDR, in many ways, was bordering authoritarian. He attempted to be more authoritarian than he actually was. Like the whole court stacking thing, he tried. He did his best. It didn't work. He did his best. Although he used the FCC actually to silence criticism of him during the war from newspapers, and he worked with Churchill as well to deny licenses to Americans who were critical of the war in England. So FDR was authoritarian even. Lincoln was quite authoritarian. He literally seized newspapers that criticized his war effort. He suspended habeas corpus. I mean, there's a lot of things with Lincoln that are kind of ugh. So there have been authoritarians throughout American history. There's not been a single fascist.
Yeah.
Donald
So
Trump
to what
is not the first.
degree do you think it's because of our checks and balances? That's, I think, what bothers me too. You know, we get bothered by the term democracy because we're a democratic republic, not a democracy. But beyond that minor point, to what degree do you think that fascism cannot survive because we have this Montesquieuan style of checks and balances, that we have the courts, we have senators, congresspeople, representatives, you know, we even have secession as a possibility. We can even reframe our amendments, add on to the Constitution. To what degree do you think that our republicanism in our country is so strong that it doesn't allow for fascism, which is what the founders wanted to begin with? They didn't want kings. So that's why they instilled such a strong republic.
Here's what I think. A system is only as good as the culture that supports it and the people within it. It needs both. You can have good people, but a terrible culture. You can have a great culture, but terrible people. You need both in order to have a harmonious coherence between both. Unfortunately, given the rise of the administrative state that has been happening since the early 1900s, checks and balances have become largely a symbolic gesture of a system that once was. The fact that you have consolidated in the fourth branch of the executive branch, the ability to make laws through fiat, the ability to review those laws through administrative review, and the ability to interpret laws through a similar kind of process. And also the ability to even escape the executive, escape oversight from the executive, means you essentially have one area of government that has all three functions of the government. And Jefferson famously said that whenever all the functions of the government become concentrated in one area, this is what tyranny is. It is a form of tyranny. I would expand on Jefferson's point. It's a form of tyranny because the tyrant is overrun by his own power. And how does the tyrant become overrun by his own power? The tyrant becomes overrun by his own power by having more than he can humanly handle. Similarly, political authority becomes overrun by its own power by having more than it can reasonably handle. So yes, we do have a form of tyranny right now within the executive branch. This is what's called the deep state or whatever. I call it the administrative state. And it's been with us for a long time. It's been growing year after year after year after year. And there are folks that actually want to learn more about this. I have some papers that were written by some very smart people who actually examine the genealogy of the administrative state and how it's taken up residence and basically deprived all the branches of their legitimate functions in some way, shape, and form. So given that, it is very unlikely that we can say it's checks and balances that saved us when checks and balances themselves have been undermined for so long. However, it is very likely to say that it is an assertive citizenry that has saved our country in many cases. And an assertive citizenry may not be able to fix the political order, but they can correct it. This is why the massive cultural battlegrounds happening right now are on social media, because if you can change the perspective of your citizens, you can change the course of your country. Propaganda's most valuable asset is not your belief, it's your consent. I'll say that again. Propaganda's most valuable asset, the propagandist's most valuable asset, is not your belief, it's your consent. Because they can mess you up in your belief system all they want. If they cannot move you to action, because consent is an action, belief can be passive. If they cannot move you to action and through your belief, their propaganda will have been futile. But the moment they can capture your belief system, then move you to action in accord with what they want you to do, is the moment they now have you where they want you.
So could you explain
so
the
many
term?
People, hold on. Yeah. So many people are so skeptical of authority in this country, so conspiratorial, so to speak, that their belief system may not be all that well. but their consent is not in the hands of those who wish to control it. That has what stopped more vicious authoritarianism from arising in this country. But by the way, guess what? Most people in this country don't think very deeply about these matters. They were worried about their families, their jobs, their lives. So much so that sometimes politics does not really have much of a big influence on their life. And to the extent that it does, it's filtered through systems that have a desire to sanitize what's happening and give them the most milquetoast, simplified narrative possible. So their belief system is already not engaged, but their consent is being passively siphoned through their apathy. That is what's going to give authoritarians the ability to continue accruing capital within America and to eventually rise. It's what gave them the credibility in past ages, for goodness sakes. Because we've seen this before. But the point is, Trump is not one. He's just not even close. You can disagree with him all you want, but to say he is like a fascist or whatever, as I mentioned before, just defies the meaning of the term and defies the sort of ethos of Americanism that he claims to want to bring back. So I must have my word on that.
So could you explain the term? I believe it's from a text. Is it by Chomsky? But the term manufactured consent. Could you explain that for some of us who
Yes.
don't know?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh, this is a fun one. See, Chomsky is really crazy, but he came up with, in the early part of his career, he had some gold nuggets that I think a lot of us can kind of clinch onto. So, manufacturing consent. I mentioned earlier the idea of the mass veto, right? The idea that consent is what legitimizes authority. The veto is what corrects it. Like, for example, the credit card. You get a $500 credit card allowance. But your limit, that $500 limit, is what corrects it and stops you from going beyond that. That's kind of how consent of the governed and mass veto work. Well, if I can then influence your consent, I can legitimize more things that go beyond what you already consented to. If I can, example, sell you a narrative that going to Vietnam is going to help America defeat communism and impose freedom in that far-flung area of the globe, and I can tap into your emotion, and I can appeal to your sense as an American, I can then create your approval for something artificially. And that's exactly what Chomsky was getting at. He was getting at the idea that the media especially plays a big role in influencing Americans to believe in things and approve of things through selective information and manipulation. That's it. So it's very dangerous because, again, if consent legitimizes my government, if my consent gives the government the power it has to do anything, then that means that my consent can legitimize other behaviors within the government. So now I've gone from giving a very limited credit card limit to authority to writing them a blank check, giving them a limitless credit card limit and saying, hey, honey, go to the store, spend as much as you want. Manufacturing consent tries to get you to that point. So we've seen this happen in many cases, right? Vietnam was one of them, right? Gulf of Tonkin, all that kind of stuff, lied about it, created pretext for war. Iraq, one of them, right? Saddam had weapons of mass destruction. He didn't. That was used as a basis to go in and topple his regime and install a provisional government, train people, and years later, those people we trained ran away from IS militias and just got up weapons and ran, right? A lot of other things like that were manufactured consent.
Yeah.
And at the time, people didn't realize that a con was being played on them. But over time, with retrospect, it became quite evident. So yeah, that's what it is, and it's a threat. It's why we have to always be on guard. We have to have a healthy informational diet.
So
Because
yeah,
sorry, go on.
No, sorry, you were speaking.
Yeah, So, because the fragility of the American system, believing authority is derived from consent, is such that the moment your consent changes is the moment the nature of your authority can also change. Propagandists know this, and they take advantage of the American system, the American political ethic, to drive forth their agenda. This kind of echoes Popper's famous paradox.
Really?
Right? Paradox of tolerance. It's kind of echoes that.
Could you explain it? Because I haven't looked too much.
Yeah.
Popper. I vaguely know of him.
So the paradox of tolerance, which was proposed by Popper in his book, The Open Society and Its Enemies, which is, by the way, a great book. All of you should go read it. A really good diagnosis of the sort of enemies of a free society. Karl Popper asks the question, can a tolerant society tolerate the intolerant without contradicting itself? The idea is that if a tolerant society tolerates the intolerant, it will inevitably be signing its own death warrant. Whereas the reverse, if a tolerant society does not tolerate the intolerant, then that essentially means they'd be contradicting themselves, and therefore they're non-tolerant society. So it's a paradox. Well, the way I fix this problem is I say, the moment the intolerant get a hold of political power is the moment the tolerant society must say no more. To tolerate is not to give one blanket permissibility to rule as they wish. To tolerate is simply to allow one in a limited circumstance to remain in a particular area, in a particular time, at a particular place.
Right.
So the tolerant society can tolerate the person that is intolerant, but I can't permit them to get political authority. Otherwise, my whole project fails. Well, the point is this. Tolerance is a matter of what? The C word, consent. And if I can manufacture your consent, I can then manufacture and control what you'll tolerate. So now we've gone from a society of real tolerance, where it's decided on an organic grassroots level, to artificial tolerance, where it's literally set by those who can control the narrative. This is one of the most manufacturing consent is a national security threat, if you ask me.
Yeah,
it's one of the biggest national security threats, because America's principles are so wondrous, but they're also so fragile because they can be misused and abused like that. If you know a little bit of psychology and you know PR, you can control a lot of people. And I hate saying that because I have hope in humanity, but I also understand the level most people are at in their focus.
Right.
It's not intelligence, it's focus. Because folks say, Christian people are just stupid. No, they're not. You're right. Not everyone knows. Not everyone knows as much as the next guy. But a lot of folks understand that sort of the basic sentiments that are required to exist in society. A lot of folks intuitively know, hey, don't steal someone's stuff. Hey, don't kill someone without just cause. Hey, don't go and, terrorize your neighbor. There's some basic things that most people intuitively know, even if they don't have the intellectual system in their head to describe it. Therefore, most people are able to exist in a society because those are the only things you need in order to exist in society. But the propagandist knows all those things at the base level, but the propagandist also knows things that require a sort of intellectual belief system, and it uses the ignorance of most people, not their stupidity, but their focus, their misplaced focus, to essentially enslave them.
Yeah.
It's a scary problem. It's a problem that unfortunately does impact a good majority of our political discourse.
So
it's a problem, as Mr. Bluestein points out. Sorry?
Yeah.
So it's a problem, as Mr. Bluestein points out, is used by the intelligence agencies to their own benefit. They've been doing this for a while. Since before either of us were born, by the way. Anyway, sorry, go on. Sorry.
So on the topic of tolerance, I don't know if you've heard this tweet or quote from Elon Musk recently, but I believe he originally tweeted, "If tolerance means the end of Western civilization, then we cannot be tolerant." So he was referring in large part to UK, because he spends a time. I think he might be addicted to his own product. He spends a lot of time on X.
Yeah. Can you put that tweet up if you don't mind? I want to see it. I'm curious.
Sure. Yeah.
You can find it. No, because I actually want to kind of dig into that. I didn't even know he said that, by the way. I'm not still been working. I've not been spent much time on X, which has probably been a good thing.
It's a good thing. Yeah, they're trying to hijack your attention.
Yeah. See, if tolerance means the end of Western civilization, then we cannot be tolerant. So here's what I think. Okay. Okay, a few things. This is a decidedly utilitarian way to approach things, and I don't support utilitarianism. I think that it is it is a sort of anti-ethical system. It cannot tell me why a thing in itself is good or bad. It cannot give me a substantive evaluation of anything beyond what use it serves in the moment. And as we know, the moment expires. And the moment does not call to our duty, because duty goes beyond moments. It transcends moments and goes towards our general behaviors and moods. So if ethics cannot account for duty, then it cannot truly be ethics. It's something else. And that's what utilitarianism is. It cannot account for duty whatsoever. Some may say, well, rule utilitarianism can definitely do that, but I think that has some other problems that I'll discuss at a later date. But generally, utilitarianism is just not a very good concept for preserving duty in society. And by not doing that, it can't be really an ethical system, unlike what it's defined as in the ethics books. That's the first thing. So Musk's approach here is slightly utilitarian in that it says, we're not going to consider the virtue of tolerance in itself. We're going to just treat tolerance as a tool to an end, as a means to an end. And unfortunately, since ends can be various, and the means to meet them can also be various if you don't have a solid foundation upon which to lay them, his statement ultimately becomes meaningless when it comes to assessing how we should act in the future. As Cicero mentioned, one of the core things that any person can do when asking themselves, what is the right kind of behavior? What is the ethical kind of behavior? Is to consider future events. If you can't predict future events, you can't act ethically in a long-form way, in a long-range way. By predict future events, I don't mean be a psychic and have a crystal ball and be like that lady from the 90s used to, Madame Cleo, whatever the heck her name was, used to call people up and say, oh, I got something for your future. Not that, but like use things in the present to reasonably produce inferences of how things in the future are going to go. You need that to be ethical. You absolutely need that. Right? You need that. You need that to be rational, actually. If you're driving a car, right? This is my driving. I'm driving, okay? My car is shaking, okay? Not actually, God forbid, but it's shaking
There's
right now.
There's a lot of speed bumps.
Yeah, speed bumps are killing me right now. If I'm driving a car, right? And there's an exit ramp right there, but there's a truck coming up right behind me. And if I don't know about future events, how can I predict that if I merge to that lane while the truck is speeding up behind me, that I might become a squash melon? Predicting future events literally allows us to live. So you have to be able to do that, and utilitarianism does not do that because utilitarianism binds us to moments. That's the first thing. Second thing, I think that a lot of people mistake tolerance for passivity. Tolerance does not mean lay down and take it like a good person, right? It does not mean that. It does not mean just take whatever abuse you want or you don't want. Tolerance literally means I'm going to give you a certain amount of grace and permission to behave within parameters, within moral parameters. And if you go beyond that grace and permission, there's going to be problems. So when I say, for example, that I'll tolerate the wasps that are outside my window, that simply means I'm going to allow them to exist as they are. But the moment they try to come into my living room by going through one of the cracks in the window or in one of my vents, I can't really tolerate them, can I? Because now they're harming my livelihood, right? The moment that the limits of tolerance are violated, the foundations of tolerance itself become threatened. Let me say that again. The moment the limits of tolerance are violated, the existence and the foundation of tolerance itself become threatened. What I mean to say is very simple. No moral concept, whether it's tolerance, dignity, compassion, justice, veracity, beneficence, no moral concept can exist without being corrected and limited by other concepts that exist within the context of civil society. Justice cannot exist without fidelity, because if I don't have faith in you, how can I trust you to be a just person? Right? Truth cannot exist without fidelity, because if I can't believe a word that comes out of your mouth, if you have no credibility, how can I trust anything you say? How can I know what you say to be the truth is the truth? So what we have here is a tension between tolerance and another principle called self-preservation, and also self-love. Let's talk about these three principles, okay? Self-preservation. Every creature, every living thing has this on an instinctual level. What makes man a little bit different is that we refine the instinct to preserve ourselves into the basis for organized structures, into political order, and also into our own defensive mechanisms. Houses come out of self-preservation. Firearms come out of self-preservation. Fire, the creative uses of fire, but by the way, fire births civilization. Without fire, we don't exist. Fire, and the Promethean myth kind of actually predicted this. Fire came out of self-preservation. We are literally able to go beyond a mere subsistence view of self-preservation and go towards a refined view, which by the byproduct created civilization. So tolerance has to abide by that, or else its foundations go kaput. Self-love. So whereas self-preservation keeps us intact, self-love keeps refining us and has us have an appropriate assessment of ourselves. If I preserve myself, but I don't love myself in the pure way, then how in the world can I do anything with myself? The self is the vessel for all moral action. No moral action can proceed from a heart that despises itself, cannot proceed from a heart that it has resentment as its core value. So I have to be able to love myself in order to do anything that is going to be of ethical import in order to fulfill duties to other people. Because how I treat myself, how I feel about myself is going to impact all my other moral faculties. So tolerance must respect self-preservation, and tolerance must respect also self-love. If you have a society of tolerance without self-preservation, you have no society at all. You have a society of tolerance without self-love. You have a society where tolerance will become a kind of hatred, a kind of resentment, where it no longer seeks to preserve the right things. It no longer has any limits. It instead becomes a sort of self-defeating principle. You must have self-love and self-preservation in order to have any kind of sound concept of tolerance. Very simple. Well, it's not really simple, but I think that once people understand, it's going to be simple. So you must have these kind of mediating principles in order to have a healthy kind of tolerance. That's it. So back to Musk's point. If tolerance threatens society, I would submit that it's not tolerance. It's something else. It's something else. It's something entirely separate. Because how can a social principle create the destruction of the society? That's a category error. It's an antithesis. It's a contradiction. It's like a well poisoning itself. The well never poisons itself. The well is always poisoned by external forces. The well brings forth life and sustenance and
so
for the person seeking
on the
drink
topic
from it.
of
The well is
Musk,
poisoned.
yeah.
It's poisoned from other people, so to speak.
On the topic of Musk, I think he was referring to tolerance of frankly, Muslim migrants, and I think that's what we were already talking about earlier in the stream.
Okay, but still, I think he's getting the principle wrong. What's
Yeah, he
happening
probably
in the
is.
UK and what's happening in Europe right now is not mere tolerance. It's self-castration is what it is.
Says recently he retweeted.
Self-castration. Yeah.
Recently,
Go
he
on.
retweeted a tweet that says, "If you live in the UK, now is the time to speak up and fight against the horrible things that are happening. Otherwise, the UK will be lost."
It's self-castration. What they have been told is that they have a duty to accept the poor masses of other countries and to not question their ways or values, or else they will be seen as discriminatory. That's not tolerance. Tolerance is saying you have a limited birth by which you can be in our country, but the moment you violate those rules, you have to get out. You have to be corrected. What's happening in the UK is that they are actually setting the rules. The people we're supposed to tolerate are actually setting the rules, which is why parts of Birmingham, according to reports, are overrun with Sharia law, informal Sharia law that the cop won't even go in and correct. Right? The idea of no-go zones, which for years was called by the media to be some kind of lie, it's actually an emergent reality in the north of France and also in England as well, and other places as well, even Sweden. So no, it's not tolerance. It's self-castration. And when you obscure moral terms by misusing them in your critique of evident wrongs, you essentially give a bad name to things that are fundamentally virtuous. You poison the well. Again, the well is never poisoned by itself. The well is always poisoned by some external force. So I think Musk is kind of poisoning the well here. It's call for British self-preservation. That's fine. But don't do it by saying social virtues caused what's happening. A lack of social virtues and an imposition upon the people. That's what caused what is happening. Moral education is the solution, not the cause, so to speak. So that's my take on that. I know I kind of went on very long about the nature of tolerance, the moral principles that correct it, the nature of social virtue versus, I understand. But the reason I go on so in depth, right, without a script, is because the problems we're facing are also quite in depth as well.
So
they will not be fixed.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, I'll let you finish. I didn't mean to.
They will not be fixed by a superficial appraisal of the issue. They will not be fixed by sensation. They will not be fixed by drama. They will only be fixed by understanding the nature of man and the context of the society he lives in, and then asking themselves what from his nature produces X, Y, and Z, and then trying to figure out in a scientific way how to correct X, Y, and Z from those same foundations. We just did that in this conversation.
Right.
The solution isn't the hard part. It's the will to enact it. That's all I got to say.
So on the topic, I know that we're running. I don't know how much time we're going to go until, but I did want to share this clip from Sky News that was retweeted, and it's talking about illegal immigrants and labor claiming that they have rights. So I thought that's probably an interesting topic to you. Would you say? I think perhaps we should play the clip.
Your lawyers, under your guidance, have said in terms that the rights of asylum seekers are more important than the rights of local people in Epping Forest. Would you at least acknowledge that that is what they will hear? And it's up to you. Ministers can say we agree with that or we don't agree with it. You can't simply say, let's balance things. Do you agree with what your lawyers said or don't you?
Yes, of course we do. But
your lawyers...
So the claim, as you heard, maybe we need to replay it for a second.
Agree with that or we don't agree with it. You can't simply say, let's balance things. Do you agree with what your lawyers said, or don't you? Forrest, would you at least acknowledge that that is what they will hear? And it's up to you. Ministers can say we agree with that, or we don't agree.
So they have a moral dilemma, to say the least. You know, our show is called Moral Panic. They have a dilemma in the UK on the moral rights, moral politics. It's going to be a part of our nation, a part of our nations, rather. Yeah, I see you shaking your head.
That lady, I just so I won't say what I think about her. I wouldn't be very kind. So let me just go towards the ideas, right? Great minds talk about ideas.
Yeah, ideas.
Small minds about people, right? Right. Thank you for.
So she's a testament of the illiberal.
The testament of the illness. Yes. Yes. I mentioned this point in my Caesar video. I have a video called Why Caesar Will Doom the West, which kind of looks at the rise of Caesarism as a philosophy within the hearts and minds of so many young people on the political right. And then part of that is again, I mentioned the Latin phrase "salus populi prima lex." Welfare of the people shall be the ultimate consideration. That's the foundation of good governance. Justice is fundamentally a principle that protects the people, and also doesn't just protect, but also enforces certain behaviors that are required for a just and civilized society. But justice literally requires, the carrying out of justice requires the statesman, the politician, to have a moral duty towards the citizenry. The moment the link between the citizen and the politician is broken is the moment no principle can be carried out, because now the politician will be governed by a different principle other than the salus populi prima lex. Their consideration will no longer be the welfare of the people. It'll be the norms of power, as I mentioned before, which is his own constellation of considerations and ideas that have a way of perverting political action towards a bad way. That's what you're seeing here in that video, at the right of asylum seekers. People who are asking your country for help matter more than the people that make your country possible is a massive dereliction of duty on a scale that can only exist if your duty with the people and your sense of attachment with the people has been forcibly cut. Machiavelli actually kind of predicted this. In The Prince, he has what is called by scholars of Machiavelli the Sketcher's image. The Sketcher's image asks the question, at least implicitly, not explicitly, but asks the question, what does the ruler require in order to rule well? Should he be in the fields with the people or upon the mountain looking down upon the people? And Machiavelli says this is kind of a double-edged sword. Because if he is in the field with the people, he will be weighed down by the sort of mundane, banal interests and desires of the people, and he won't have the perspective required and the independence of mind required to be a good leader. But if the leader then says, I'm going to go up to the mountain to be away from the people and look down upon them, he will no longer possess the perspective of the people, which will allow him to govern effectively. He'll be instead governing an abstract idea, which can lead to certain ruin for his regime. Now, personally, I don't think there is an option to go up to the mountain. The mountain shouldn't even exist in this dichotomy. The leader needs to be right in the field, because the moment the leader's independence of mind is challenged by others, he has demonstrated that he does not have the ability to be a leader. Cicero said, it's the mark of a great mind to be able to maintain a solitude of self amidst the crowd. Emerson echoed that point as well, that the consistency of a great mind is an example of an authenticity of itself. The leader does not exist in contrast to the people. The leader exists because his position is legitimized by the people. Therefore, there is no separation. There is a sort of adjacent relationship going this way between the leader and the people. However, far too many politicians pick the second option in the scripture's image, where they do believe that the mountain is the better position. And they go up to the mountain, they look down, and they let the world of the mountain govern what they think, as opposed to the world of the people. And the world of the mountain is most certainly what is called Washington, D.C. I'm not blind to this. This is what actually happens. This is real politique, as one of my old classmates in college used to say. He was one of the most, quote unquote, pragmatic, I don't mean that positively, thinkers out there. He would always say, well, isn't this just real politique? And that's that classic Southern accent. Well, isn't this just real politique? I mean, can't we just admit this is how things are? You know, just really grind my gears. I'm like, will you stop? How things are literally downstream of something else. You can see, that's different for a different day. That kind of thinker, by the way, the kind of statistical, this is how things are thinker, it just annoys me. And I don't say that because of his methods. As you know, I believe in induction. I believe in observation, empirics, statistics, that kind of stuff. I'm not against that. But I'm against using certain ways of measuring knowledge as arguments in themselves, right? A statistic is not an argument in itself. It's a data point that tells you about something in the observable world. An argument is how that is packaged towards a particular end. But people treat stats argument, which is very odd to me. I don't like it. It's bad epistemology.
You don't like what? So I mean, I know we've had our. I wonder if you're critiquing empiricism.
No. Let me be correct. Using a statistic to get us some broader truth is good. Okay. Using a statistic to make using a statistic as an argument in itself is bad. Because stats don't make arguments. Stats
support or reject. Yeah.
So I don't reject using them. I reject using them as an argument without building upon it. Is that clearer?
Yeah, that's clear. Yeah.
Yeah. Like if I say, for example, that a study says that all dogs in a particular area have white fur. Right? Well, that's an observable fact. Good. But if someone then tries to use it as an argument in itself to state that dogs having white fur are bad, you can't do that. There are too many dogs with white fur. There's an inequity here. That's not. You can't. Why are you using that stat as an argument in itself? Right? There is a limit to reasoning by means of statistics. Statistics should be one part of a broader process of argumentation and finding the truth. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
I much prefer the statistician to the mystic that talks about scarlet women riding on beasts, hydras, right? Like Jordan Peterson was doing a few in that video I shared.
Yeah, he likes to speak in a lot of analogies.
Yeah, scarlet beasts riding on hydras and Luciferian principle, all this stuff. Get away from me too. Get away.
So, as a final topic to kind of recap, I want to ask what you think the role Machiavelli plays in some of the topics that we talked about. We talked about manufacturing consent. We talked about, most recently you mentioned realpolitik, but we talked about cultural shifts that affect politics. We talked about the power of unions and the power of propaganda. What do you think Machiavelli, in his middle-aged wisdom, I guess you could say, what do you think his role? Because you mentioned Nietzsche, but it turns out Nietzsche himself was influenced by Machiavelli. So what do you think our discussion of fascism, our discussion of progressivism and manufacturing consent and all these different topics, what do you think? Are there certain truths that Machiavelli got and was able to foresee in some respects in how Western republics evolved?
Here's what I think. Machiavelli, when it comes to how to get power, maintain power, and operate in the arenas of power called politics, is one of the most influential thinkers in the Western tradition, bar none. I think his tactics are being used to this day. And by the way, there's a debate over if Machiavelli even was being serious with the prince. Some people think the prince was actually an act of satire. I have a hard time believing that. So that's a debate happening right now.
Could be both. Maybe he was like semi-serious.
Yes, people think it was just a big joke, which
That's
okay,
interesting.
maybe it was, but it's been read literally for ages, and we should not isolate the literal impacts it has had on the formation of political order in the West, because its author may have intended a different purpose, right? Intentions and impacts are different things, and they can sometimes be useful to understanding each other, but not always. So he has had more impact than I think any other strategic thinker in the Western political tradition on how a lot of people operate. But I think he would not be very fond of a lot of the leaders today in how they use power in ways that expose them, right, to defeat. Machiavelli was very much a sort of all or nothing kind of take it by storm, have it and keep it kind of thinker. A lot of politicians today, especially in a sort of Western liberal society, which was not the society that Machiavelli grew up in or lived in. He lived in a society of dynasties and the Medici family and nobles and gentry, like that literally ruled areas, and kings and kingdoms and princes. So the kind of society we have today in the West more broadly, I don't think he really could have even predicted it. It's a foreign world to him. And he would have definitely said that it poses unique problems to the prince, the ruler, the statesman, because the people have retained knowledge of what they are, what their heritage is, their freedom. And Machiavelli said in The Prince that if a people remember their ancient liberty, you cannot conquer them, you must destroy them. He said that because you would not be able to keep them in bondage if you were to conquer them. So even he knew the threat a self-aware people, a self-aware citizenry poses towards the continued existence of political order. We have a self-aware citizenry, at least in some capacity, especially with the advent of the internet, that couldn't have even been imagined in Machiavelli's time, where information moved much more slower and was much more susceptible to control than it is now. So I don't really think the Machiavelli type model is able to be exercised to its fullest extent, but it's certainly being exercised quite wantonly.
What do you think about the concept of unions replacing, to some degree, these noble families, that as we entered a more progressive world and we see these unions dictating our politics, that if you live in a country with leftism present, that the modern noble family of leftists end up often being these unions that you must have their approval in order to proceed?
The thing that gave the gentry of medieval times and classical times and pre-Enlightenment times the power they had, it gave the nobility the power they had, was the system that supported them, normally the feudal system, if you're in Europe, or any other kind of hierarchical system, and also the mythology of bloodline, which supposedly the bloodline of royal blood supposedly conferred status that no one else could touch. That's what gave them so much staying power, was those incorrect ideas in the mind of so many people in that period of time who were divorced from really enlightened reasoning. Well, the moment enlightened reasoning came along, and the moment legitimacy was placed within human nature, arising from human nature itself, and not arising from bloodlines and ornate statuses, was the moment it became much harder to have any kind of nobility that is not symbolic in most Western countries. Even the royal family today, which is one of the oldest forms of nobility, which I used to have ultimate power in England, has been reduced to a symbolic gesture, which many people in Britain wish to see gotten away with entirely, see them as a tax base now. That's the result of Western liberalization. So, having said that, I don't think that unions have that kind of status. They're a much newer force, a much more polarizing force, and their presence is not met with the kind of reverence and the kind of complete system backing that the presence of nobility were met with. So I don't quite think that's going to happen, but they, again, can play a similar role that is kind of antithetical to a healthy society that nobility played, but just in a different way.
I see. Well, I certainly have much more curiosity, but I think we'll have to end it for this stream. Unless the chat, we want to open it up to the chat.
Yes. Let's do about 3 minutes. Let's do 3 minutes. If the chat wants to ask any questions of us or say anything, if we miss anything, let us know. We'll do about 3 more minutes. Then I got to roll off because I need to, dinner is getting ready and I need to eat, and I'm going to go relax and enjoy my Sunday night. And I hope all of you can do the same thing as well. I do think I'll make a small announcement. Yeah, I do think now that we've done this stream, I do think this will be my video for today. We'll do that. Okay. So tomorrow I'll actually do something else. This has been 2 hours and it's been great. And we're gonna clip some things from it too, by the way. So this will just.
Oh, and if you're listening, small self plug. I have an X, please and I will be doing a lot of independent takes. So,
Nikoji, please put your X up on the screen. Show your X on the screen. Do it.
So if you're interested in nonpartisan takes and aspiring polymath takes, you can follow Nikoji TV. I put a little photo of the great Frederick Hayek, which used to be in my Discord photo. I don't know if you remember that back in the day, Christian.
I do.
So yeah, if you're interested in small takes, and maybe I'll grow my medium and write more there. Maybe I'll do some poetry. But Blue Streamer said Elon's persuasion is an American social liberal. He does have a past.
It is. You see what he's gotten himself into, right?
I think he's.
You know about the actual St. Clair situation, right?
What'd you say?
You know about the actual St. Clair situation?
Oh boy, drama alert.
I'll be brief. I'm not going to talk too much about it.
I know he has a legion. I know he definitely likes to.
Ashley St. Clair is this conservative influencer. Well, conservative quote unquote influencer. Jesus, I hate people throwing on that word like it's meaningless. It means something. She's this conservative influencer who met Elon through her influencing work, and they had a baby together. The baby was conceived outside of a union of marriage, and she was told to keep hush-hush about it. And then she got mad at him for not wanting more or whatever. And so Ashley St. Clair went on Twitter and went to the media and caused this big hubbub over having Elon's baby, and Elon not responding to calls, and Elon not wanting to be a father. So This happened like what, a few months ago? This is the kind of stuff the richest man in the world, a genius, I would even say, gets himself into. This is the kind of stuff. This is the kind of stuff.
As Nietzsche would say, human, all too human.
Look, it doesn't. I don't care how much status you have. I don't care how much fame you have. I don't care how much wealth you have. If you still have a fleshly coil, you're going to get driven into some things that will call your name. This is why a healthy moral sense is good, because your reflection allows you to resist these things. But some people just, they can be the richest person in the entire globe, no one else richer than you, and still fall for something like that. It just boggles the mind. It's Jesus. It boggles the mind. It boggles the mind, seriously. I've been thinking about philosophy all day. If I was the richest man in the world, I wouldn't be.
Well, that might explain Buddha, because
I wouldn't be worrying about chasing.
Yeah.
Anyway, we'll discuss that later. It's the drama these people get into is just amazing. Anyway, yeah, so I think we did a pretty good job. Again, guys, go follow Nikoji. Follow me, subscribe if you guys are new here. If you're not new here, then be sure again to go to my other videos and give them a watch, maybe like, comment on them. Let me know that you're watching Moral Panic. Let me know that you're still with the channel. We are on the way to 20,000 subscribers, and we're on the way to beyond that as well. I believe it. But I believe the way we're going to get there is through all of your help. We're going to get there by you guys continuing to show up, you guys continuing to help out, and you guys continuing to encourage both me and Nikoji as we continue to deal with this stuff. Short announcement. Next week, we're not going to see what the guest might be because I don't know yet, but next week we're going to try to have a guest with us. So please be here next week at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as always. Unless something changes, I'll let you guys know in the community post. Join our Discord. Someone, can you put the link to Discord in the chat, Nikoji? Join our Discord, guys. If you're not in the Discord, then please go ahead and join. It would really make me happy. I want to hear more from you guys. I want you guys to be part of our community. As I mentioned, we're building a pensive cohort. And the pensive cohort is going to be collaborative. And in being collaborative, it's going to, I think, have a pretty sizable impact on the future of our cultural conversation. So I would encourage you all, please join the Discord, be a part of the conversation, be a part of what we're trying to build here. Just please show up and all that stuff. And
I'm trying to get a working Discord link. Discord is sometimes weird. Their links.
Yeah, let me actually. I'll just slap a link down real quick in the chat before we go. Let's see.
I think this one should work. I got it.
You did? Okay.
Oh, and now StreamYard. Actually, you try it. It's not working for me. Yeah.
Did it pop up? I think it did, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So there you go, guys. Join the Discord. I just linked it in the chat below. Join the Discord. Again, show up. It's gonna be awesome. The cohort will be awesome. And I'm just really excited to see how this stuff goes. If you're not already in the Discord, join the Discord. Again, please. I want to see you guys, talk to you guys, and all that good stuff as well. So, without further ado, I think we've had a good conversation. We've had a good stream. Do you have anything else to say, Nikoji, before we close off?
Mainly 2 words. Stay pensive.
All right, everyone. Have a good night. Bye.
Good night.